Today, on the third day of World Mental Health Week, we have a very unique guest speaker with us, Honorable Professor Dr. Girishwar Misra sir. He is a former Vice Chancellor at Mahatma Gandhi Vishwavidyalaya and HOD at Delhi University, pioneer in the field of Indian psychology. Today, he is going to enlighten us on a very relevant topic, that is self-refinement process and potential. So not taking too much time, now I would like to request our honorable guest to kindly proceed today's session. Sir.
Thank you, uh, dear participants and listeners. Today we are going to focus on a theme which is very significant in contemporary life, and that deals with self refinement. The idea of self is one which is very near to us, dear to us. However, we hardly think about it, and we very often take it for granted that I have these qualities, these kinds of potentials, and we try to engage with a variety of activities in life. Interestingly, the quest for self has a very long history. Uh, we have statements like Atmanam Viddhi, or know thyself. And this quest is reflected very well in almost all Upanishads. Within the discipline of psychology, which is very close to the analysis of self, the father of modern psychology, William James, who was a professor at Harvard, used that self is the puzzle of puzzles. To understand till a question within the discipline, and each of us tries to answer that question fact. We as human beings have capacity to treat ourselves as objects. We are endowed with this capacity of self-reflection. So we have this ability to treat ourselves as an object, and we try to think about the object called self. We try to define that, and if you go to psychological literature, you will find that there are about 70 terms where self is used as epithet. We have self esteem, self determination, self control, self awareness, etc. And they are being considered as objects of a study. They are assessed and they are analyzed in relation to other concepts, and a large number of theories have been proposed to explain the findings. Here it should be mentioned that the study of self uh, was initially considered as part of philosophy. When it came to psychology, it received diverse kinds of treatments during different phases. So, one of the dominant schools of psychology, which is still continuing in some way, behaviorism, tried to get rid of terms like self or consciousness because it appeared subjective, and behaviorists were not interested in subjectivity. They wanted to study objective phenomena. So it's only in last, I will say, about 4 or 5 decades that the study of self has gained significance, in particular after 1990. Several things happened, and people became more and more interested in understanding self. Uh, as far as Indian approach to self is concerned, we find that there are terms like Sharir, Atman, or Jivatma, and Brahman. And the organism is considered as a Jiva. Interestingly, the existence is treated at three levels. One is the gross physical, sthula. Then we have the subtle, sukshma, that may be considered at the level of mental functioning. The mind represents that. Then there is another nature of existence that is called causal, Karana Sharir, Sthula Sharir, and Sukshma Sharir. So one is the physical at the body level, and second is the Sukshma level where we take into account mental functions and whatever happens within the domain of mind. And the third is the causal level, which is at the level of prana, and which is supposed to one which contains the essence and perhaps that is responsible for uh, the transition from one birth to the other and how you get those qualities and all that. But at physical level and mental level, these are two very clearly uh, known ways of construing our existence. There is another very important notion which comes from one of the Upanishads and which is very popular, which considers understanding of self as a multi-layered, hierarchically organized construct. And that construct has several layers. It is known as the idea of pancha koshas. You have the outer layer, that is the physical level of existence, which is known as Annamaya Kosh. And then you move to another level, Pranamaya Kosh, Vijnanamaya Kosh, Manomaya Kosh, Anandamaya Kosh. You can have a detailed account in the Three Upanishad, and it is very frequently talked about, so I will not go into the details of this. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the meaning of self is constructed in terms of a structure which has several layers, and one can have identity at different levels. And there is external physical layer. You begin with that and move to higher levels, and the highest level in this conceptualization is the level of ananda, the bliss. And that shows that, and if you go into the details, you will see that the vital function, the pranamaya kosh, vijnanamaya kosh, and the manomaya kosh, they reflect different kinds of psychic functions. And you notice that mind body division is not made in a way which is very common in the Western thought. Both constitute a complex. Both are part of same structure. Uh, in psychological literature, the use of self is uh, done in so many ways. It is considered as a total person or an agent or the experiencing subject or the executive agent. You use self in different ways. One important feature of the notion of self is that it relates to ego, and ego is central in almost all analysis. The focus is largely on satisfying ego, expressing ego, one is in love with this ego. There is thought that one should have high self-esteem, uh, and there is a very strong need for self-verification, and more recently, a trend has been noted of self-enhancement. In most of the individualist societies and cultures, there is a tendency for self-enhancement. One does not like to listen bad things about oneself. One doesn't like to listen to the criticism of oneself. One likes to see oneself in a very positive way. Self becomes center of attention, and it is through self that you relate to the world. It is very crucial. And a lot of work is being published which tells that self love is very prominent. The other part of the story is that many of the mental health problems are problems related to inadequate functioning of self. Failure in relating yourself to others, inadequate analysis of your own qualities, lack of self regulation, all these things are found to be significantly related to pathologies. As a matter of fact, one psychologist named Mark Leary wrote a book with the name Curse of Self. The Curse of Self. That self has become a curse. Well, there are many historical analyses that when self emerged in history of humanity and how it became important. And once you have this notion that what are its consequences. So the history of self at societal level and history of humanity has an interesting feature which tells that it provided a way to improve life, to have relationships, to act. It was an anchor. But the dominance of ego became a problem. And now it has become a pathological issue, a very important concern. So, how self is conceived and structured is central to our well being, our health, our notion of well being is very closely related to the notion of self. Now, the problems which are there, it is argued that the problems that we have about self largely deal with egocentrism, that you consider yourself limited to your own personal perceptions, desires, expectations, needs, and you think that if they are satisfied and if you are able to do whatever you want to do, then you will be happy. So, well being is related to the notion of self and how self is realized. It is very clear that what is manifested is not limit to your selfhood. So people imagine, they plan, they aim at certain goals, they pursue certain objectives in life. So they are not limited to the present only. They have ability to reflect and recollect past events. So one can be happy or sad using earlier memories, incidents. Positive events or negative events can make you happy or feel happy or unhappy. So, self is not a fixed entity. As an object, you can have a scale and you can measure with the help of that verbal scale that these are the properties, how I perceive myself. And that is often used, and the score does provide some indicator, but that has its own problems. But self as a process is one which is always subject to change. Self is always constructed, and it is constructed in our socio cultural milieu, the context in which we live. Whether you are living in a nuclear family or joint family, whether you live in village or in a metro city, who are your friends? If you go on analyzing, you will see that your notion of self is related to so many things. I'm talking about the way psychologists proceed to understand self. One thing is very clear, that self is a structure which is constructed and which changes, which can take many forms. And there is no limit to it. What is included within self is very difficult to tell. If you go to the notions of selfhood within the traditional thought, you find that the physical self, the social self, interpersonal self is one which is always changing, shifting, is not permanent. And there is notion that this Jiva is one part of higher consciousness or the divine. You may call it God, you may call it anything. There are many beliefs, and these beliefs play a very important role in constructing the notion of self. They are related to religion, they are related to practices of a particular culture, the meanings which are shared in a particular culture. So, the cultural context plays a very important role in defining the notion of self. Now, we have a lot of uh, research which tells that the individualist cultures program people to conceptualize self as independent. And in collectivistic cultures, self is considered as interdependent. And there are studies in India and abroad in many cultures to support this kind of understanding. The interesting thing is that the interdependent self is one where the self and not self boundary is porous. So something which is in the individual can go to the group, and what is in the group can come to the individual. The separation is not so clear. There are many studies which indicate about differences in ways of perception, uh, motivation, and emotion across these diverse ways of selfhood. But one thing is very clear that many cultures, including India, do believe that self has a structure which is not merely physical. And how you understand that, how you structure that understanding, that depends on your own position. Your theoretical philosophical position will tell how you structure the idea of selfhood. One thing is very clear that self is growing and changing and is subject to modification. And there are ways to pursue selfhood which are positive, positive for the person as well as those who live with that person. When we talk about self refinement, our focus is on the possibilities of modification of self. In Indian culture, there is a term called sanskar, which means bringing in positive qualities and removing the negative qualities. And the various qualities which are liked, which are appreciated, are related to culture or community where you live. And there are many attributes which have positive contribution to well-being, and there are attributes which are bad, which have negative impact on person's life as well as life of the community. For example, aggression is negative, violence is negative, indulging in conflict is negative, compassion is positive, cooperation is positive. You have all the qualities. This is just for example that there are qualities which are good, which are liked, which support life, and there are qualities, attributes, or dispositions which are negative in their impact. There are many kinds of interventions to develop different kinds of attributes. Modern psychology talks a lot about it, and they, they have all kinds of training modules to enhance emotional intelligence. There is a program for assertiveness training and whatnot. Within Indian thought, there is a very strong position which focuses on a holistic improvement in one's life. I hope you can guess that, and that intervention is yoga. You have Hatha Yoga, which is actually a discipline for body. You have Raja Yoga, which is discipline for mind and also body. By Raja Yoga, I would like to refer to the Ashtanga Yoga that you have, the yamas, niyamas, asanas, pranayama, dhyan, dharana, samadhi, pratyahara, all those steps, if you look at that, it is a kind of cultivation of selfhood, which includes physical, social, mental, as well as spiritual development. So, yoga becomes an instrument for growth and development. Maharshi Aurobindo has very strongly written and explored and demonstrated through his own work and life, which he calls integrated yoga. Now, integral yoga, or if you, the book which he has written is Synthesis of Yoga. If you go to Bhagavad Gita, it talks about the way of jnana, karma, and bhakti. So all of them are combined. An appropriate combination of these various techniques can help bring in peace and prosperity. In fact, one can pursue all the four purusharthas: dharma, artha, kama, moksha, which cover the entire spectrum of our desires and respond to the demands of well being. In order to move forward in contemporary life, where there are difficulties, tensions of various kinds, it is critical that we should pay attention to these systems, and it is through adopting these systems with certain degree of concentration, commitment, sincerity, that one is able to achieve the goals of well-being and make it possible to achieve a higher level of existence. There is very little time to expand this idea, but the spiritual growth and physical prosperity both are included in Purusharthas. In fact, the notion of dharma in Dharma Shastra states yato bhyudaya nishreyasa siddhi sa dharma, that abhyudaya, that is worldly prosperity, and nishreyas, that is moksha, liberation, both are parts of dharma. Dharma is realization of these goals. So, realizing one's true self, which is nothing but consciousness, truth, and bliss. Satyam Shivam Sundaram. So one has to realize one's true nature and the kind of distractions which have come up. Those distractions have to be removed. The educational system should have opportunity to work not only outwardly but inwardly. I would like to conclude that refinement of self involves inner growth, looking within, realizing your own potentials, and there is no limit to that. And there is a need to create harmony between individual being and moving from the egoistic existence to higher level of existence where you cross the limits of ego, individuality, and you move towards higher level of existence. That is yoga. That is union yoga, the meaning of yoga is union. So this is an invitation to grow, which is an inclusive growth, which relates to others and which tries to move towards the completeness. I'm reminded of the great idea Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. We are from a culture where this totality, entirety has been highly valued. Our existence, which has become highly individualistic, egoistic, is leading to all kinds of conflicts, dissatisfactions, and unending race. And that should not be the aim of life. A life which is meaningful, fulfilling, where you have satisfaction, is the life which should be desired. I think that requires us to utilize the techniques of meditation, yoga, devotion, and to grow within. Thank you very much for providing this opportunity to draw attention to the challenges that we face in the process of self refinement and indicating some of the possibilities that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a nice explanation about the self in a very simple and scientific way, from modern perspective to ancient Upanishad perspective. You have mentioned very well about how we should understand self and move towards unlocking our true self. So I think people will learn a lot from today's session with your such a insightful knowledge. Uh, just we have take a question from our audience side. He wants to ask, sir, what is the scope of research in indigenous psychology and how different universities can enhance it? Basically, he wants to know how we can enhance the Indian psychology in our academic.
Important question. In recent years, there is greater reception for ideas from indigenous psychology, and many university departments are open to this possibility. Uh, the resources which are available to work with indigenous psychological concepts and theories are now increasing. And I am sure that many departments have come up with research programs where students are encouraged to take up these issues. Uh, as a matter of fact, the scope for indigenous psychology is very, I will say, uh, wide. Wide in the sense that the traditional approaches which are available in psychology, they have reached to some kind of saturation, and it's mostly repetitive, replicative, and there is very little theoretical improvement. In terms of empirical studies, people feel free to choose any variable or any concept and relate to another concept. And you fulfill the requirements of research, and therefore you are happy to get a degree, but that doesn't contribute to either personal growth or contribution to knowledge. So there is a need to uh, re-examine these assumptions. In terms of methodology, now first person methods are also being used. In qualitative methods, there is autoethnography. It is one accepted method. I don't want to elaborate this point right now, but there are many research questions which need sincere analysis from indigenous psychological perspective, and they will be definitely welcomed because they will contribute to understanding, and there will be some growth in knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful explanation. A question from my side is also related with it. We see in India, there are, especially in the field of clinical psychology, we are using not mostly the indigenous perspective, whether we are talking about counseling, we are providing any kind of therapy, any kind of treatment we are providing to clients in the field of clinical psychology. So, what will be your advice to the new aspirants, especially in the field of clinical psychology, the students or the mental health professionals, to how they should adopt the Indian psychological techniques?
Within the field of clinical psychology, here I would like to bring a very important concern. The concern is that indigenous psychology, or to be more specific, if you try to use some of the insights from Ayurveda, let us say, and you want to apply to certain problems in a different context. So you have the problematic categories of uh, pathology and difficulties, the nature of that, and you take one part from one tradition and use in the other tradition. It may work. The human reality is shared, but it is also unshared. So one can go for entire paradigm and conceptualize the problem adequately from that perspective, and then see what are the ways in which applications can be done. There is another possibility that you consider it merely as a technique, take it from Ayurveda or from any other tradition, and use that some technique from yoga can be used to address problems related to memory or sleep disturbance or any other kind of problem, or developing a technique. All those possibilities are there. There are many good attempts which have been made, and recently a survey of ICSSR, which has been published by Oxford University Press in 2019, that has a full chapter on what is the contribution of yoga psychology. There are other sources also, and the S. Vyasa is publishing a journal also, uh, an international journal about yoga and its uses. So now these resources are coming up, and I think we need to look into those resources, examine them, and try to use those concepts, techniques, and give a chance how they are relevant. Uh, you can modify them appropriately. So there are different possibilities which are coming up. We need to have courage, determination, and commitment. I will certainly, you know, share my hope that people like you and others who are interested in these traditions are going to make change, and that change will be for a better treatment in research.
Thank you so much, sir, at last for providing your valuable time and provide a deep insight towards self-refinement, process, and potential. Before winding up today's session, I just want to ask that what will be your conclude advice through this session to all the psychology students, aspirants, and all the world and humanity through this session?
Uh, I think that the contemporary life, consumerism, materialism, and we are witnessing its consequences. And if we limit ourselves as persons, as human beings, to only these concepts, there will be no future for already there is evidence that diverse effects of climate change are because of human intervention, and there will life from this earth if we continue like this. Our notion of development has failed. So we made some change, and now we call sustainable development. And if we really want sustainable development, we have to realize that there is a need to enrich inner life. The peace, growth should also be directed inner journey, and it stays to that. Things in our research, we hardly focus on that. So there is a need to create awareness on the part of psychologists and students in humanities to see the possibilities and create scope for dialogue, debate, understanding to realize the limits of the growth model, the economic growth model, and create changes in our practices of learning application, which help people realize the broader goal. Uh, I think it is right time to initiate such interactions and bring in change in our approach to learning, research, and practice.